Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to walk you through the process that I use to help my clients buy the perfect airplane. Now, this video is going to be perfect if you are an aspiring aircraft broker or even established. That way you can see how other brokers do it. Also, if you're a buyer, this would be a good video for you, so that way you can see what the different steps are to purchase an aircraft. I'm also going to include a checklist, and that's going to be down in the description section. There's going to be a link and you can click on it, and that's the checklist that I use. So that being said, let's get right into it. So step number one is, once I have a potential buyer, I meet with them and I try to figure out what their mission and their needs are. Now, there's usually two types of buyers. You have the buyers that know exactly the make and model they want. They have a budget. They know what avionics they want and what upgrades. So that's an easy one. But there's also a different type of client that they are new to aviation, and they don't know which airplane is able to fulfill their mission. So with that type of client, I sit down and I go through a whole list that I have of questions. And with those questions, I can find out which airplane is going to fulfill their needs. The next thing that I do is, once we have a clear understanding of the search criteria, I put it in writing. So what I do is I draft an aircraft acquisitions agreement. In this agreement, I include my commission. Sometimes is a percentage, other times is a flat rate. And I also include the search criteria in writing, so that way, because I don't want to get into finding the airplane and then they change their mind. No, that's established from the very beginning, exactly what it is that they need. So once I have that agreement signed, I start looking for airplanes. And where I start is on listing platforms. And that's going to be Trade a Plane, Controller, Barnstormers, ASO, Wing Swap, right? And just try to look for that airplane. But there's situations in which maybe there isn't that specific airplane in the market, in the public market. So if that's the case, I also start looking at off-market options. Now, how I do that is I would download the database of all the owners of that specific airplane in the US from the FAA's website, and then I skip trace their address to find their phone number and start calling them and see if they would be interested in letting go of their airplane. And then I would also tell them, hey, are you looking for an upgrade? So that's one way that you can tap into off-market airplanes. Because it's funny. I've seen like listings in Facebook Marketplace that say off market, but if it's advertised anywhere, it doesn't matter. It's not off market anymore. Off market means exactly that. It's not in the market. Anyways, so once I have a list of different airplanes that I think would fulfill my client's mission, I send it to them, and then they'll pick the one that they like. Well, maybe one, two, or three. It don't matter. So they send them back to me. Hey, Alex, I like these airplanes. And the next thing that I do is I call the seller. Sometimes I'm going to speak with a direct seller, and other times with the broker. And what I do is I ask questions. Hey, why are you guys selling the airplane? What's the story behind it? And I also request copies of the logbooks. Once I have the copies of the logbooks, what I do is I go to aerospace.com and I order an AOPA title search package. It's like $99. And in this package, I'm going to get a title search, and that's going to show me if the airplane has any liens or a cloud in the title. Very important before we even move forward. I want to know that information. They also provide me with all the Form 337s that were filed with the FAA. If you're new to this, a Form 337 is a form that a mechanic fills out anytime they do a major repair or alteration. So if the airplane has been involved in any sort of accident or incident, I will be able to see what type of repair they did. And apart from that, I also get an NTSB report showing any accidents or incidents. Now, the thing is, with any accidents, some are reported to the NTSB and you will be able to see them in that report, but other times the incident or the damage would not be reported to the NTSB. So that's why it's important to check the 337s and the logbooks. Then I go and review the logbooks from the very beginning to the very end for the propeller, engine, and airframe. And these are the things that I look for. When was the last annual done? When was the IFR certification performed? When was the overhaul performed and by who? Because depending whether it's a field overhaul or it was overhauled by the manufacturer, that's a huge difference, okay? So that's going to affect how much I'm going to offer for the airplane, because if it's a field overhaul where Joe Blow, the mechanic, did it in his shop, well, that's not the same as Lycoming or Continental doing the overhaul. So to me, that's going to change how much I'm going to offer. So I look for that. I also look for when the last 500-hour magneto inspection was done. And of course, I look for any damage history through the logbooks. I also look for completeness, making sure that there's no gaps. Well, sometimes if there's gaps, it could be that the airplane was sitting, but I would want to figure out what's going on with that. Also for any indications of corrosion. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I do a whole report on my findings and I share it with my client. And depending what it is, I'll put different numbers. Hey, I think based on this information, you might have to spend X amount of money down the line. And something that I forgot to mention, I also check for the compression trends, right? So I go to the engine logbook and I check for the compressions of the last annual and maybe for the past 5 years or so, or even from the overhaul, depending when it was done, to see if there's any trends downward on a specific cylinder, because that could indicate that there's a leak and my client would have to replace the cylinder. So I want to catch those things before we even get to the pre-buy. Now, if you are an aspiring aircraft broker, this is something that I do because I am a certified AMP, so I know what I'm looking for. But if you don't have that experience, I don't recommend you do that because you still don't know what you're looking for. So it's better to maybe talk to a local mechanic for them to review the logbooks. Once I have this report, the logbook review report, I go to BREF and I do a valuation. So I put all the information of the aircraft, like the airframe time in the engines, any upgrades or modifications, and then that will give me a number. So based on the information that I collected from the BREF and my logbook review, I come up with an offer. Now, the way that I present that offer, it depends. Sometimes I draft a letter of intent or LOI where I put my offer in writing. I put how much we're gonna put as a deposit, where we're gonna put the deposit, and the steps that we're going to follow in order to close on the airplane. Now, that's something that I do sometimes, but for the most part, I will call the seller or email them and tell them, hey, this is what we are offering for the airplane based on my logbook review and what the BREF says. I don't like going to the seller and saying, hey, we're just gonna offer X amount of money with no explanation to why we're coming at that price. That's something that I do. Now, at that point, we might have to negotiate maybe the price or the terms, but once we come into an agreement, we set up a time and a day to go see the airplane. So I'll have my client go, check out the airplane, make sure it looks good. Now, it doesn't have to be in this exact order. Sometimes there's clients that don't want to travel to where the airplane is until they are in the pre-buy because they don't want to do 2 trips. So there's some flexibility there. But if they go check out the airplane, everything looks good, at that point, I will draft the aircraft purchase agreement. And with that purchase agreement, and once the deposit is placed in escrow, the buyer will be allowed to do the pre-buy inspection. So at that point, me as the broker, I will contact a mechanic and have him do the pre-buy. Now, here's the thing with mechanics. You have to be, as a broker, you have to be on top of them because there is no checklist that mechanics follow for pre-buys. There's a checklist for annual inspections, but a pre-buy is there's no checklist. So depending on the mechanic's experience, he might check certain things, he might not check other things. So you kind of got to be on top of the mechanic. And what I do is when I do my logbook review, I will highlight certain areas, like emphasis areas, and I will share that with the mechanic to make sure that they check that. For example, when I check the trend on the compressions of the engine, I'll tell the mechanic, hey, please check cylinder number 3 because it looks like it's getting low. So, check if there's any leaks or whatever the case may be. So you gotta be kind of on top of them. But once the pre-buy is complete, there's not a single pre-buy that I've been involved in where they didn't find anything. So at that point, there might be some more negotiations that I might have to do. Usually how I go about that is I'll have the seller cover the airworthiness items, and if there's any cosmetic items that were found during the pre-buy, I'll have the buyer cover those. It doesn't always happen like that, so sometimes you might have to negotiate back and forth with the seller and the buyer and just come up with a solution that works for both of them. So at that point, we might have to make some amendments to the purchase agreement. I'll do those amendments, send it to escrow. So they have, like, if there's a different price, a new price, just so they are aware of that. Also something that I didn't mention, but right before the pre-buy inspection, it is a good time for the buyer to start shopping for insurance. And usually I send them to BWI Aviation Insurance Agency. They're great. And also, if they're trying to purchase the aircraft under an LLC, it's a good time either before the pre-buy or even in the beginning to start filing for the LLC, because depending on the state, it might take a couple weeks to get that. And you don't want to get to closing and we're still waiting on the LLC. That would not be good because it would just delay the closing. So closing is pretty simple. I mean, you have the buyer wire all the funds to escrow, and as soon as escrow gets a notification and approval from the buyer and the seller to close, you will close. And at that point, me as the broker, what I do is even before closing, I send them my acquisitions agreement showing what my commission is. And that way on closing, I also get paid my commission. Once closing happens, then the next step is to help the buyer with a ferry pilot. Sometimes, depending on the aircraft and depending on the buyer's experience, he might be able to just go and pick it up and bring it back to his home. But in other instances, depending on their time and hours, we might have to find a ferry pilot that complies with the insurance's requirements to ferry the airplane. So I'll be in charge of that. I'll find the ferry pilot. And then something that I do is, again, I'm in close contact with the ferry pilot because I need to ensure that when he goes pick up the airplane, aero is on board. So airworthiness, registration, POH, and weight and balance is on board. Because I've had that happen before where, the airworthiness certificate was missing. And I also ensure that they board all the logbooks, because we don't want him to, deliver the airplane and there's one logbook missing. So I'm in close contact with them. Even sometimes I FaceTime them to make sure that everything is on board the aircraft. And then they make the delivery, and that's pretty much it. That's the process. I mean, I don't want to make this video super long, but there's like so many more details into this whole process. So if you're an aircraft buyer and you just don't want to deal with it, feel free to contact me. I'll have my information down in the description. It's actually a link, and you can click on it, fill out the information, and we can have a conversation. And if you are a broker, an aspiring aircraft broker, and you want to learn more about this process more in depth, I also put a course together to train brokers start their own aircraft brokerage business. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hit the like button, subscribe for more content like this, and I will see you in the next one.